Hello, everyone. Stakuya here.
And I'm Gabby.
And welcome back to the podcast, my hoes. Welcome back to the final, and I promise you, at least for now, that this is the final episode that we are going to be doing on Napoleon.
Because if you guys want more episodes on Napoleon,
then by all means, go ahead and like this video when it ends up going out on YouTube. Really, I can't really tell as much of what happens when it goes out on like Spotify or anything else like that here for a podcast. So if you want a fourth episode, something that goes over all the finer little details and weird little stories and stuff that just wouldn't really fit into, I guess, like a full episode on here, then go to the YouTube video when this comes out. And if you're listening to this on YouTube right now, then go ahead and like that video, because if this video gets 2,000 likes, I would say, then we'll go ahead and create a fourth episode for it on, again, weird little details and little things that went on with Napoleon.
Our researcher was like, I can add so much more, but it would be easier to just do another episode if people would like it, because it is very like niche stuff. So it's not like the general Napoleon knowledge.
Exactly. Which, on that note, this last week we left off Napoleon crowning himself as Emperor of the French on December 2nd of 1804. And this was a really big moment. Europe was at peace. But at the same time that, Europe was at peace, all the nations knew that this was temporary and that they were using it to gear up for the next conflict. That was actually going to come pretty soon, actually. In May of 1805, Napoleon would further antagonize the Austrians by crowning himself as the King of Italy with the Iron Crown of Lombardy at the Cathedral of Milan. Which, Gabby, yes.
We just went to the
cathedral. We were literally there today.
Guys, that is so cool. Before we continue with the rest of this episode, I hate to do this, but we are currently in Italy for our group trip to Italy. And if you guys want to join us on a group trip, make sure to join us in Austria and Germany for the Christmas market trip that we're doing in November. And yes, it is over Thanksgiving, but we specifically did this because a lot of people we know as people who worked at jobs that never gave us enough PTO don't have a ton of PTO. So maybe you could potentially take, your PTO with Thanksgiving that's already a holiday and then do the trip and then be back in time to join into work like you never left.
It's true.
You'd have a lot of fun memories, doing a lot of cool things like going to see castles, going to see Christmas markets.
Getting drunk with me.
No.
That's probably going to happen if you join me. If you want to do it, I'm telling you, this is either something that's either going to really turn people off or get them going.
Seeing fortresses, doing a lot of fun stuff.
And like getting drunk with me.
Ignoring my husband. But anyway, if you guys would like to join us on that trip, please make sure to go sign up because I think we only have like 12 spots left. The trip is absolutely happening. It is confirmed. So make sure to go do that. If you want to, there's payment plans available. Only 25% down is needed to secure your spot. And we'd love to see you there because these are usually so fun. And I'm so excited for Italy because the group chat with Italy is absolutely unhinged. Like people, they've been making too many jokes.
At the time that we're even recording this, we're getting ready to meet up with people tomorrow as it is. And it's already...
Okay, so one person was out of the group chat for a little bit and they genuinely were like, wait, are there political undertones to this trip? Because everybody else was, what did you say?
They were talking about raiding and pillaging and burning down Rome.
And he said it was Viking maxing, which is so strange, but I guess they know what that means. And everyone was like, oh my God, no, we're joking. It was a joke.
Yeah, we're joking. Wink. Wink.
No, they're joking. Anyway, if you guys want to be part of the chaos, just sign up for the trip. Love you. Bye.
Anyways.
Back to Napoleon.
To Napoleon at the Cathedral of Milan, which again, we literally were at today. And oh my God, that thing was stunning. But I'm not going to gush over the whole thing with the Italy trip that we're currently doing. It is a really cool cathedral. So I don't really blame him for doing it there in the first place. Also, the whole thing for the Crown of Lombardy. That whole thing is the Crown of Italy, which is one of the signifying crown jewels, so to speak, or like imperial regalia. Like that is the thing that would signify the King of Italy. And with him controlling that region, since northern Italy was oftentimes the base of the Kingdom of Italy, him owning that and crowning himself with it is a really big deal.
How do you just go from like France to Italy? How's that legal?
Because here's the thing. He's an emperor. Emperor is a higher rank than king. You can be emperor of something and also a king of another. Emperor of something, king of another thing, duke of another thing, count of another thing, baron of another thing, knight of a set order. The only thing is that you can't really be emperor of two things at once. You kind of could, but it creates more complications.
Was Italy cool with him just being like, hey guys, guess who's your new king?
Oh God, no. But the puppet states that he set up in Italy were.
How do you just set up a puppet state?
You basically create a state in there that the person you put in power there is loyal to you.
So Napoleon was CIA maxing.
Pretty much, yes, he was. Like, okay, remember how you had Spain?
Yeah.
So the king of Spain, when there was a whole thing for a succession crisis, Napoleon went forward and said, hey, I got a new king for you. Oh yeah, who's that? My brother.
Me.
And so he put his brother on the throne of Spain, which in turn...
How do you just do that? He was not Spanish literally in any sense of the word.
No, and it actually created a lot of problems because arguably that's one of the points when people talk about Napoleon and what he could have gone and done differently in history. Not putting his brother on the Spanish throne is arguably one of the points that would have been much better for him, because in doing so, it really pissed off large amounts of Europe because they saw him as an even further threat. And also, that decision was horrible because Spain rejected it outright. Like the Spanish countryside, he fought a guerrilla war in Spain for a decade because of this.
Really?
Which drained French resources.
Why would he just do that then? I just don't understand. I don't understand. If you're emperor of France, how are you going to be like, okay, Italy, okay, Spain, guess what? That's just fucked up. That's just too much. You're doing too much, Napoleon.
Well, that is the definition of what Napoleon does. He does too much. And the only reason that he's been able to do too much is because he did so much before. He was able to get away with so many things because of just how incredibly powerful and impressive he was. This in turn caused him to overextend, as we're going to get into.
Suffering from success. DJ Khaled.
That's Napoleon, was suffering from success. He got way too full of himself because of his success. But again, we're going to get into that. So, okay, he does this at the Cathedral of Milan. He also incorporates Genoa and Liguria into his Italian kingdom, which led to a formal protest by the Austrians who claimed that this violated the most recent peace treaty that they had. By September of 1805, then, the Third Coalition had formed against the French Empire and its satellite states. You had Sweden, Russia, Austria, Naples, and the Ottoman Empire, who would all join Great Britain in a new war against France, which was aptly named the War of the Third Coalition. Now, honestly, it's really quite amazing that any of these major nations who normally could not agree on what the color of an orange was to actually fight alongside one another on the same side of a war. This was the level of a threat that they felt that France evoked. Like, they had to team up. This is one of those cases of like, France throughout this entire time is almost like that Randy Marsh meme, if you've seen from South Park, of like, I didn't hear no bell. Like, you know that, except at the same time, he's not getting beaten. He's the one doing the beating. Because that's France. They're continuously teamed up by these powers against them, and somehow, time and time again, they just win and win and win and win.
Until that one time, they retreated. And now they're forever known as these little bitches.
Basically, yeah. So during the preceding 2 years in which there was actually peace, Napoleon had been assembling a large force in northern France, whose purpose was to invade Britain, which never actually tried to get peace from him. This force was the basis for Napoleon's new Grande Armée, which he formed in August of 1805. The force was comprised of about 350,000 soldiers who had been training and fighting for years. These guys were elites. They also had the benefit of competent officers, which was something that many of the entities within the Third Coalition didn't really have, because at this time, yes, you could have a competent leader, but you had a much more likely chance that someone was inexperienced and incompetent because they had simply purchased their commission rather than actually earning it. Yeah, we could explore that topic on its own, but just to point out the difference that this policy made, the Royal Navy of Britain did not have this custom. This was the undisputed commander of the seas. They did, on the other hand, allow purchase of commissions in the army, and they frequently found themselves with very incompetent officers that would end up losing crucial and winnable campaigns. Like one of the key examples is probably the War of, Independence with the American Revolution, which is also a thing that ended up happening because of different generals that were fighting each other for not actually physically fighting each other, but hindering one another for power and prestige and influence on the battlefield.
Hey everyone, Sakuya here, and before we get back to the show, I would just like to thank today's sponsor, eBay Motors. eBay Motors is here for the ride. Remember when you first saw the potential, and then through some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own? With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, exhaust kits, turbochargers, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
In typical fashion, though, with this war, Napoleon would make the first move of the conflict. He wanted to advance at a rapid speed and defeat the Austrian armies in southern Germany before the Russian and Ottoman support forces could arrive. On September 25th, Napoleon and 200,000 French soldiers would cross the Rhine into Austrian territory. Now, the Austrian commander and the majority of the Austrian forces were concentrated at Ulm, which I have to say this right now because I know this is a thing that's put here in the first place. For anyone that has played Europa Universalis 4, which I know Gabby gets so tired of literally every time we travel in Europe, and I reference EU4 from all the varying things.
We walked up to Milan Cathedral today and he's like, Gabby, every single time I travel to Europe, I just feel like I need to conquer that nation in EU4. And I'm like, Steven, lead with the fact that it's in EU4 because you just said you wanted to conquer Italy.
I mean, I do want to do that anyway, but that's probably not going to happen, to be fair.
Viking Maxi.
God, me running for political office 10 years from now and this is taken as a sound clip.
No, it literally will be because have you seen some of those out of context clips they just post?
Hey, listen, there's going to be an out of context clip of what happened with me on Twitch where I was wearing the cat girl maid outfit costume. I already know that. For anyone who is listening to this right now and doesn't know.
I already have the clip saved, ready to go at my best convenience.
Listen, when I'm running for political office again, it's going to be Stephen Bell, let freedom ring. And then also Stephen Bell, servant of the people.
And he'll be in the maid costume with the little bells ringing on the cat ears. So do with that what you will.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, Napoleon wins. Hands down. After a few small engagements, he is able to outmaneuver the Austrians and deal a very decisive blow at the Battle of Ulm, and 60,000 Austrian soldiers would end up surrendering, with the French having suffered only around 2,000 casualties. That's massive. As with the Egyptian expedition, though, Napoleon could not hold on to this triumph for very long. The Royal Navy was able to catch the French and the Spanish navies out of port who were trying to make a run to northern France. In what became known as the Battle of Trafalgar, Horatio Nelson and his outnumbered force were able to deal a decisive blow to the less well-trained Franco-Spanish Navy. They didn't really have as much experience in this regard. The French Navy was so utterly destroyed that it would not recover before the French monarchy was restored, and mainland Britain would never be threatened by invasion again. Like that just, you would not see Britain be under possible threat of invasion until literally World War II. That is how decisive of a blow this was. Back to mainland Europe, though. After the decisive victory at Ulm, Napoleon and 100,000 of his comrades would march on Vienna and captured a majority of the Austrian military supplies there. After a brief occupation, he decided to march north and pursue the remnants of the Austrian forces under Emperor Francis II, who was linking up with the Russians under Tsar Alexander I. Now, for whatever reason, Tsar Alexander and Emperor Francis overruled their advisors, and they decided to engage Napoleon on December 2nd at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805.
Is that the lake one from the movie?
Yes, it's the lake one. If you ever watched the Napoleon movie with Ridley Scott, you would believe that the coalition forces tried to ambush the French camp while the main force was sitting on a hill ready to counter ambush. But no. That whole thing was so overly, stupidly simplistic, and at the same time did not. No, that's not what happened.
But it looked cool as shit.
Okay, I admit, it looked cool as shit. It did. I will grant that to Ridley Scott. It looked cool as shit. But no. Napoleon, at this time, he ordered his right wing to feign a retreat to try and entice the coalition forces to come off the high ground and pursue them. This was a very difficult maneuver. Like, I'm telling you this right now, especially with infantry, this is next to impossible. Feigning a retreat has a very high likelihood of turning into an actual retreat. Because let's say that you send all your soldiers forward, right? And they get beaten, air quotes, when I say that around beaten, and they run away. The rest of your forces, seeing your troops running away, can in turn cause them to want to run away. And on top of that, those forces that are retreating, they're now disorganized, meaning that if they get attacked properly by fast cavalry, they're dead. This is one of the key reasons as to why feigned retreats were so commonly utilized by like Mongol and other steppe forces, those that were utilizing cavalry, like pure cavalry forces that were actually had the speed and ability to maneuver and run away. But yes, for the Grand Armée, though, of France, no. They were able to execute the plan with great success. When the right wing began to retreat, coalition forces obliged and they chased after the fleeing French, while Napoleon's left flank occupied the heights. When the time came, the routing French would turn, and both flanks would then catch coalition forces in a pincer movement that would decide the battle. At this point, around a third of coalition forces were killed, wounded, or captured, and the army was in full retreat. This was massive. 2 disastrous defeats at Ulm and Austerlitz would force Emperor Francis to the negotiation table, and there he would sign the treaty on December 26, 1805, exiting from the Third Coalition. He was also agreeing to give up substantial territory in Italy and Bavaria, and also pay war reparations amounting to 40 million francs. With Austria knocked out of the war, Russia would also seek terms. In what amounted to a ceasefire, Alexander and his army were allowed to march back to Russia unmolested. They would not have to do anything. Britain, despite losing 2 of its biggest allies on the continent, wanted to continue to fight indirectly by financing anyone who was willing to oppose Napoleon. But again, with Austria and Russia exiting the fight, the Ottomans felt that there really was no reason to continue their fight, and so they opened up relations with Napoleon. In February of 1806, the Ottoman Sultan would recognize Napoleon as Emperor of the French, and quickly thereafter, the two would actually agree to an alliance. Both France and the Ottomans were looking for mutual protection against Russia, but both were wrong in thinking that either would come to the other's aid should a new conflict arise. Ultimately, the Ottomans would end up paying the price and would eventually enter a prolonged conflict against Russia and Britain, which they would eventually lose without any meaningful French assistance. But that's something else. Nominally, Naples and Britain were still continuing the War of the Third Coalition, but neither really had the ability to directly counter the Grand Armée. Napoleon would launch an invasion of Naples and would quickly depose the Bourbon king, and from there he would set about consolidating power in Europe and installed his brother Joseph as the new Neapolitan king. He also would install his younger brother Louis as the King of Holland. Yeah, this is the whole thing with Napoleon, is that he's literally just putting his varying different brothers. He's got a lot of siblings, so he is just putting his brothers on different thrones all across Europe.
I need a brother like that. You hearing this, siblings? I have 3 of y'all. Appoint me to a position where I can rule over people. Thank you so much.
Hey, maybe your sister could make you like a police chief down in Orlando. I'm sure that is something.
I feel like she would have to be a police chief herself.
No. I'm sure with enough political intrigue and maybe bribery, you could just have that happen.
I can hear the comments right now. Hashtag, they're just going to be all hashtag ACAP. So thanks, Steve.
Anyway, so yeah, Napoleon would go and create a buffer zone between France and her enemies, known as the Confederation of the Rhine. Emperor Francis feared that these new satellite states would allow Napoleon to crown himself as Holy Roman Emperor. And so he decided to one-up Napoleon by not allowing that to happen. This, my friends, is where we've talked about the Holy Roman Empire and how it existed throughout all time. It was basically dead by the 1700s, thanks to the wars with Prussia. But it was Napoleon that would finally kill it, because fearing that Napoleon may declare himself to be the Holy Roman Emperor, instead of allowing this to happen, he would just destroy it. On August 6th, 1806, Emperor Francis II would decide to set aside the imperial crown and dissolve the Holy Roman Empire after 844 years in existence. That's massive. The new Confederation of the Rhine was seen as a threat as well to King Frederick William III of Prussia. For the first time, Prussia decided to declare war on France, kicking off the War of the Fourth Coalition. Prussia and Russia would sign a new alliance, and Britain would commit financial resources to the cause. Frederick William was not known for his military genius, though, unlike earlier Prussian leaders, and he made a huge blunder. He declared war prematurely. Russian forces were still in Russia. Meanwhile, the Grande Armée of France, they were still in southern Germany. In his textbook manner, Napoleon and 180,000 soldiers would invade Prussia before Russian forces could actually move in to adequately support the Prussians. For whatever reason, the Prussians were marching west, further away from Berlin and any Russian reinforcements. Napoleon would maneuver his army between the Prussian forces and Berlin. And on October 14th, 1806, French forces would engage the Prussians in two separate battles, easily defeating the Prussian army before the Russians could ever actually linking up. It was just such a stupid amount of speed, he just completely and utterly outmaneuvered them. Frederick William had left command to his officers, who were now dead, wounded, or captured, and he was unable to keep his army together, and the numbers began to simply melt away. The French would continue to pursue Prussian units in retreat and were able to capture around 150,000 of them. Frederick William thought that there was still a chance at victory, though, if the Russians could just enter the fight, so he refused to negotiate a peace. After a brief stop in Berlin, Napoleon would march his army into Poland and would meet the advancing Russian army. The two armies would fight another stalemate in February of 1807 and another stalemate in early June. But victory would not evade Napoleon for long. On June 14th, Napoleon would fight a decisive victory over the Russians at the Battle of Friedland, reducing the Russian army by a whopping third.
Ooh, a third?
A third, which you got to think, this is hundreds of thousands of men. Like,
yeah.
It's a lot. Russia surveyed the field and realized, okay, we're not going to gain anything by fighting here. So Alexander I would sue for terms. The two emperors would meet on a raft in the middle of a river, separating their two armies, and would hammer out what would become known as the Peace of Tilsit. Russia was actually let off relatively easy.
Was Alexander the guy that he met in the tent? No, because he met the general or whatever and was like, oh yeah, we did you a favor. But was that the guy who became his BFF?
Yes.
And then, like, I guess double-crossed him or
yes.
turned against him?
Oh, yes, literally all that, yes.
How do you become best friends and then turn against your BFF for
they
life?
They oversimplified it a lot, because here's the problem. They moved forward by so many years, right? Okay, they skipped past all this stuff. Essentially, here's the breakdown. I know we're going to get into this, but spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't looked into any of this. We've talked about the Continental System in here before, right, Gab?
briefly, but I don't understand what it was. A trading system.
It was the trading thing. Basically, for anyone who is not familiar with it, the Continental System was Napoleon basically going, hey guys, do you live on the continent of Europe? Yeah? Okay. You're not fucking allowed to trade with Britain. And I swear to God, if any of you even trades as so much as one teabag with them, I will burn your entire nation to the ground.
Okay, but wasn't Britain part of Europe?
Yes, but it was also seen, because remember, during all of these fights, Britain was never trying to get peace. Britain was always continuously trying to overthrow Napoleon.
Because they had like the most advanced navy? Or?
No one could touch them. They would never sue for peace because they never really lost anything there.
Because they were an island and isolated from everyone else?
Correct.
And also they had the best navy because they were an island?
Correct.
I mean, it's smart on their part for having a really fucking powerful navy.
Literally correct.
If
They were
they were an
touchable.
island.
That's the whole point.
Like, what do they have to lose? Nothing. It's kind of like the U.S. because, like, you know, we're
Hey, you
kind of,
don't touch our boats.
yeah, they're really far from everyone except for, you know, like Mexico and Canada. But, you know,
Yeah, no, you're entirely right. The United States, both in terms of its natural geography, just in terms of its what it has for agricultural production, industrial production, resources, everything, combined with its relative isolation from the rest of the world,
I feel like
means that it's in a overpowered position.
theoretically we could just like hole up on the mainland and just vibe
Yeah, no, it's one of those
until
things.
someone decides to send some rockets our way, and then I don't know what I think so. Back in the back last year when North Korea was doing they were North Koreaing. I was a little bit nervous, I guess, and so I Googled what we can do if people decide to nuke us. But apparently, they have like stuff to counter that.
Yes,
I'm like, that's
missile
crazy.
defense systems. Yeah,
And then I also figured out like the best cities because I'm unhinged. I did Google like the best cities to move to. I'm not gonna tell y'all because you'll move there and then they'll become like targets too. But sorry guys, sorry guys.
I'm not gonna care about any. I'm just gonna save myself. Screw all of you.
No, I love you guys. I just feel like you could do the research yourself. It's on the internet. You can do it if you wanted to. But like the most likely to be targeted states and cities. And so now I know where exactly to go if things get really heated. Because there's like whole ass, like the US is massive. There's whole regions nobody gives a shit about, right? So you just gotta like truck it to one of those regions because there's nothing. There's nothing. It'd be you, a cow, and some grass. And nobody's nuking a cow and some grass. So just think about that when you do your research and you'll be fine. I'm not gonna tell you, okay? Because I would like my safe zones to be safe.
And then Kim Jong-un said, and F that cow in particular.
No, he won't do that because, you know, they have limited resources.
Yeah, no, absolutely true.
So
Absolutely true.
I did so much research. I am so paranoid, you guys. I have multiple mental illnesses. So I have nothing better to do with my time.
But research how to survive a nuclear holocaust.
Literally. It keeps me up at night. Sometimes you're dead asleep and I'm Googling.
See, I want to make fun of you for that, but then you've seen the Wikipedia binges that I've gone down for varying different things.
And yours is like, oh, what was Catherine the Great's something or the other? And mine is like, how do I survive the world ending? So I don't know. I feel like we're the same but different.
Oh, yeah, no, we are the same but different. And speaking of limited resources like what we were talking about, yeah, that was the entire purpose of the Continental System.
God, how did I get there? Don't answer that. Just go.
Okay, fine. Anyway, as I said earlier, this was basically the rule that was set up that Europe was not going to be allowed to trade with Britain. Russia would agree to these terms, as well as some minor territorial concessions, but would frequently then end up violating the continental system.
It'd be like that.
That would be the big problem. Now, Prussia did not have the same success in negotiations. They would have to fund the French occupation of Prussia, as well as concede almost half of its territory and populations to the French. Out of these territories, Napoleon would create the Kingdom of Westphalia, which he would grant to his brother Jerome, and the Duchy of Warsaw, which was granted to Napoleon's ally, the Elector of Saxony. Napoleon's treatment of the Prussians was brutal, and that would create resentment for decades. Napoleon's nephew, Emperor Napoleon III, would be treated harshly in 1870 when he was defeated and captured by the Prussians. The Prussians were dealt with so severely that the Russian population would clamor for Russia to end the alliance and re-enter the fight. It was that bad. With peace temporarily settling in Europe, Napoleon would return to Paris and focus his attention on shoring up the Continental System. Like Portugal, as an example, they weren't abiding by the new system. They had a long-standing alliance with the British. So Napoleon secured permission from the Spanish to send a French force over the Pyrenees and invade Portugal. The Portuguese royal family would then flee to Brazil, and the French managed to then occupy Lisbon with very little military resistance. This is a fascinating time in its history of itself, but I kind of want to talk about what ends up happening with the Portuguese royal family in Brazil, because Brazil prior to this moment didn't really have all that much of a national identity, so to speak, but the royal family going and fleeing and operating out of Brazil during this time gave them the national impetus, I suppose you could say, that would then later cause like Brazil itself to develop its own empire. Like, it's fascinating. Brazil also would be one of the last states in the world there to keep slavery around. And it was, if I recall correctly, thanks to the emperor at the time, who was actually an avowed reformist and tried to get rid of slavery. But that wouldn't be until like the late 1800s. Anyway, economic unrest in Spain, combined with unease about their relations with the French, resulted in a palace coup in March of 1808. The Spanish king was deposed in favor of his son, but Napoleon had different plans. He summoned both the deposed and the new king in a meeting where he, quote unquote, convinced both of them to give up their rights and forfeit them over to Napoleon. Now, whether or not the Spanish royals were bribed, threatened, intimidated, or anything, that didn't really matter. They went and relinquished their claims to the throne, and Napoleon instead installed, can you guess it?
One of his siblings?
His brother, Joseph, as king of Spain.
What did he do for his sisters?
Oh God, actually, I'm trying to remember that in here in the first place. One of his sisters, because I think he had two. Did he have two sisters? Oh God, this is going to bother me now at this point. I don't really remember. Marriage alliances. They were used for marriage alliances.
That's the worst possible scenario. Now you got to marry some dude that you don't even like, that you don't even know. It was hard enough marrying some dude that I liked and knew.
That's kind of what ended up happening. Okay, remember how a whole thing with Napoleon being married to Josephine, of course, right?
Yeah.
And she couldn't give him an heir. So there's the stories there of he.
Oh, and he married Alexander's sister.
No, he wanted to.
Oh.
He wanted to, and Alexander refused.
Whose sister did he marry?
He married the daughter of the or is it the sister or the daughter? He married a relative of the Emperor of Austria.
Oh, and
she did not want him.
And then they had like a son, and then when he lost everything, she went back to her people,
Correct.
her folks.
Yes.
That's messed up.
Yeah. She actually ended up coming to like him over time, but she did not want to be with him in the first place.
Relatable, because according to the movie, he was kind of in love with Josephine. So who would want that?
Oh, he absolutely was.
He still was?
Oh yeah, he did not willingly give up things with Josephine. Like, and that's also why the scene. Remember the scene where he physically slaps her at their divorce hearing?
Didn't make any sense because he would never do that.
No sense whatsoever.
Yeah. But I just don't understand giving up everything with Josephine. I mean, they could have just adopted a son.
Technically, yes, but it creates a succession crisis.
I get that. But like, could they just have given it to a daughter?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's iffy.
Well, she didn't have any kids though. But
yeah,
I just feel like it's sad. It's so sad. It's Romeo and Juliet 2.0.
Also, theoretically, it creates another problem.
Shakespeare was like Napoleon.
Well, remember how many brothers he had? Imagine this.
Too many.
Imagine he chooses one of them to be the heir. Right?
And then the other ones
get pissed off and start a civil war to basically tear the new empire apart.
I get why he did what he did. However, he didn't have to divorce his wife. He could have just gotten like a little gal pal. A friend, if you will. A friend who had his heir, if you will.
If I recall correctly, there actually was a thing that ended up happening where he got a lover to prove that he wasn't impotent. I can't remember.
In the movie where his mom, was it his mom?
Yeah.
Got the younger woman to sleep with him just to see if he was the problem or if it was Josephine. Was that real?
No and yes. No, in the sense that there's no proof of any kind of arrangement between his mother and someone or another. He had relations with people and things prior. So they already had proof that he could.
Okay.
If I recall correctly.
Okay, so his mom didn't creepily or
Like, I think he had at least one bastard.
how could you do that if he was so deeply in love with Josephine? That's messed up.
I think he was prior to Josephine.
It better have been. Now
And even
I'm
then-
rooting for
And even then,
Josephine.
he would end up cheating on her after she cheated on him.
Jesus Christ. Did anyone in this time period do anything normal?
No. No, especially not if you were royalty, to be fair.
Well, you hate to see it.
Yep. So the Spanish were not happy with this whole situation. And, with 150,000 French soldiers being garrisoned throughout the Iberian Peninsula. And so they began to revolt. A major revolt in Madrid in May would spread to the surrounding territories. And the situation would quickly develop into a sustained conflict for the French, who were constantly fighting against small forces that were using irregular tactics. This conflict is actually where we first hear the term guerrilla warfare, not to be confused with the animal gorilla. So in Spanish, the term for war is guerra, with illa or ia meaning little. So guerrilla, right? That means little wars. So when we say guerrilla warfare, it's actually guerrilla warfare. That's where that comes from. It's just a little language pun that I like to put in there. Anyway, the British would land an expeditionary force in Portugal under the command of the Duke of Wellington. Unprepared for the invasion, the French ended up losing a battle on August 21st and would evacuate Portugal. The defeat would convince Napoleon that he needed to take command in Iberia himself. And so on November 6th, Napoleon took command of some 240,000 soldiers in northeastern Spain and marched on Madrid. He would win a series of battles and would enter Madrid on December 4th. And then in January of 1806, the French would win another major victory and force the British to withdraw from Iberia. Believing the job to be done, Napoleon would return to France and leave his brother Joseph in command. Now, Napoleon would never return to Spain, as he was drawn to other conflicts. The British would return then and lead a coalition of Portuguese and Spanish forces against the French in a protracted conflict that tied up significant French resources all the way until 1814. Napoleon would reflect upon the Peninsular War as the unlucky war that ruined me, which is really true. It tied up all those forces that he needed. By the year 1814, French forces had been pushed back across the Pyrenees, having suffered some 150,000 casualties. Both sides of the conflict would commit many atrocities, including the killing of civilians and prisoners. It was a brutal war. By April of 1809, the Austrians had decided that they were ready for another round in the ring. They had observed the French struggles in Iberia and felt that it was a good time to strike. On April 10th, 1809, the Austrians would invade Bavaria, kicking off the War of the Fifth Coalition. Now a French satellite, the Bavarian army was able to hold off and survive against the disorganized Austrians long enough for the French to arrive in force. Napoleon would arrive at the front on April 17th and would secure a quick victory over the Austrians. He would immediately march on Vienna, but most of the population had fled, and the Austrian army had destroyed major bridges and withdrawn their arsenal. This time, there would be no major seizure of supplies. On May 21st, Napoleon would attempt to cross the Danube without rebuilding the bridges, but the Austrians would fight to a bloody stalemate, which they dressed up as a victory over the French. The French would make a second attempt to cross the Danube in early July, and they were successful in forcing the Austrians to retreat. But both sides would suffer significant casualties during this time. Napoleon would pursue the retreating Austrians and would then force them to sign an armistice. Austria was holding out hope of a new British force landing in mainland Europe, but when the British would land only a token force in Holland and suffer almost 4,000 casualties from disease before ultimately withdrawing, it just didn't seem like anything was going to work. And so with no additional support, Austria would sign a new peace deal. This time they had really screwed up. The harsh terms would cede Austria's Polish territories to the Duchy of Warsaw, their western territories to France, and would force the Austrians to pay a ludicrous 200 million francs in war reparations. He would also manage to secure a marriage to to the daughter of the Austrian Emperor, Mary Louise, on April 1st, 1810. Mary Louise would then give birth to Napoleon's first and only son, the future Napoleon II, in March of 1811. Now, Napoleon would continue to consolidate territory in mainland Europe after his peace was secured with Austria. By the end of the summer of 1810, Napoleon now ruled about 40% of the entire European population, either directly, like through direct control of France, or indirectly through the varying different satellite kingdoms that lived under French hegemony. One of those satellite kingdoms, the Duchy of Warsaw, is something that would cause direct conflict with Russia, who did not want a French client kingdom on its borders. In late 1811, Napoleon began planning an invasion of Russia itself. His Grand Army was reinforced by Austrian, Prussian, and Polish forces, and the invasion force would total around 450,000 soldiers, the largest force seen in Europe in arguably its history since ancient times. On June 24th, 1812, Napoleon would invade Russian Lithuania. Now, the Russians had implemented a scorched earth policy as they retreated further into Russia, hoping to delay the French until winter would set in. On September 7th, the two armies would finally meet at the Battle of Borodino. In what would become one of the bloodiest battles of the time, some 80,000 soldiers would be killed, wounded, or captured. The French would hold the field, but the battle was honestly more of a stalemate. Still, though, they would be able to move on. Napoleon would enter Moscow on the 14th, but by this time, the Russian governor had already set the city on fire. Tsar Alexander would then refuse to negotiate a surrender, and the French were running extremely low on provisions. They couldn't stay still, and were then forced to evacuate Moscow after a 6-week occupation. The Russian winter had set in at this point, and while the French were retreating, they were constantly being harassed by Cossacks and other irregular forces. Over a 3-week period, the French army would lose about 60,000 soldiers to disease, starvation, and hypothermia. On December 5th, 1812, Napoleon would leave his army for Paris as they continued to retreat to Allied territory. Of the 450,000 French and Allied forces that entered Russia, only about 75,000 returned. The Russians' regular army had also suffered around some 300,000 casualties during the campaign, but the death toll on both sides, including militia and civilian deaths, is estimated to be over 1 million. And mind you, this is 1 million back in the 1800s, not the 1900s after massive economic and agricultural booms leading to a booming population. While the French were recovering from the disastrous Russia campaign, Sweden and Prussia would declare war on France in March of 1813, kicking off the War of the Sixth Coalition. Britain would join the coalition in June, and Austria would change sides again following in August. The coalition would suffer defeat at the Battle of Dresden in August, but Napoleon was losing men faster than he could actually replace them. More importantly, coalition forces had finally had a significant reserve force to reinforce their armies. In mid-October, coalition forces would engage the French at Leipzig in what would become known as the Battle of the Nations. The French were roundly defeated and went into retreat. Napoleon was offered generous terms for a peace. He would have to withdraw from Iberia, he would give up all territory east of the Rhine, but this he flatly rejected. As a result, coalition forces would invade France in January of 1814. The Duke of Wellington would also cross into the Pyrenees into France with another invading army of British, Spanish, and Portuguese forces. Napoleon was defending France with 70,000 soldiers against 200,000. And simply outnumbered, Napoleon would abdicate in favor of his son, but Tsar Alexander I demanded an unconditional surrender. After being persuaded by his marshals, or rather, I guess being threatened by them at this point, Napoleon would surrender on March 6th. It's at this point that everything has just gone downhill for Napoleon. He gets exiled to Elba on April 11th, 1814. And for a time, actually, at this point here, Elba, he completely turns around this backwater little area, which should have been a point of humiliation, and yet he turns it into a striking example of proper governance. It's really crazy how that whole thing happens. And he makes a dramatic and famous return to France on March 1st, 1815. Two forces ultimately get sent by the French king that has been put back on the throne to capture Napoleon, but these forces end up defecting to him. The Congress of Vienna that would follow declares Napoleon an outlaw and puts a force into the field to go after him. Napoleon would invade Belgium in early June with 124,000 soldiers, and he is met on June 18th by a coalition force led by the Duke of Wellington near the village of Waterloo. Napoleon was unable to defeat the British here before the Prussians were ever able to arrive, which in turn would allow them to break through his lines. It would be a total defeat. Napoleon would flee back to Paris and was forced to abdicate for a second time. Fearing reprisals from the Prussians if he was captured, Napoleon would opt to surrender to the British, and the Royal Navy would have him ultimately exiled to St. Helena. While on this little island, in the middle of nowhere, Napoleon would be escorted by a guard at all times, and the island was patrolled by no less than 10 ships at any given time. There would be no escape. In the end, Napoleon would die on May 5th, 1821, of uncertain causes. Recent studies do suggest that it is stomach cancer, but the possibility of him being poisoned with arsenic is also there. Looking back at the sheer amount of death and destruction that Napoleon's wars caused, it is estimated that up to 3.5 million military personnel perished, and up to 3 million more civilians died as a result of his campaigns. That is not even including the indirect deaths that could have been caused from disease, starvation, the economic policies, literally any amounts of suffering that you possibly want to test or account for. It could be anywhere upwards of 10 million or more. Who knows? But we know that around 7 million people died as a result of him. And it's insane to think about that. But my friends, that is finally, in the end of Napoleon, both like metaphorically and also literally, because it's the end of the podcast episode with that. My friends, thank you all very much for listening. If you could remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. If you could remember to leave us a review here on Spotify or Apple or wherever it is that you're getting your podcast. And if you would like, just make sure to check us out on Patreon if you want ad-free episodes and not have to deal with, the other little annoying part that comes with all this. You get bonus episodes if you go and join Patreon. My friends, thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye, guys.
Bye.